I'm Tom Spiggle with the Spiggle Law Firm, where we represent people who've been fired or afraid they might be. Today, I want to talk to you about the DC Human Rights Act, which is a really powerful law that provides a lot of protection to covered employees. So let's talk about who is covered by the DC Human Rights Act. The DC Human Rights Act does cover all the categories that you would find under federal anti-discrimination, so race discrimination, sex harassment, discrimination based on sex, national origin discrimination. All of those are covered in the DC Human Rights Act. But it includes some other categories that are not covered under the federal law, which is usually Title VII of the Civil Rights Act, is the big one. One is the class of employers that are covered. The DC Human Rights Act, unlike Title VII, covers all sizes of employers. So you got one employee or you got 1,000 employees. If you're in DC, you are covered by the DC Human Rights Act. Under Title VII, the threshold is 15 or more employees. So you're 14 employees in Virginia, you're not protected by federal law. I know it's a little crazy. There could be some state laws that protect you, but there's some holes there. It's a little bit of Swiss cheese. DC don't have that problem. Everyone is covered. There are also what we call protected categories, for example, like race, sex, national origin, that are included under the DC Human Rights Act that are not included under Title VII. For instance, family status is included. Sexual orientation is included. Obesity, courts have held that obesity is included under the DC Human Rights Act. These are all greatly broaden the protections offered by the Act that are not offered under Title VII. Title VII, there are some ways you can bring a family responsibilities type claim, but it's got to be sex-based. You got to shoehorn it into a sex-based claim. Well, they're treating her this way because she has children. In DC, you don't even have to. It's just family status. You know, you're married, you're not married, you're gay, you're straight, all covered under the DC Human Rights Act and covered by every employee, covering every employer. Some other key things about the DC Human Rights Act to remember is it does not have caps, what we call caps on fees. So under Title VII, depending on the size of the employer, there are certain caps you cannot go above, and your damages for emotional distress, for instance. The max you can get under Title VII is $300,000. DC Human Rights Act, there are no caps. Also to consider that the DC Human Rights Act reaches beyond the borders of DC. So let's say you work for a company outside of DC, but the decision, the HR itself is in DC, and that's where the decision is made. You are then still covered under the DC Human Rights Act, even though you don't live there. So it's a great act. It's got much broader protections than Title VII. If you're in DC or if your company is based in DC and there are decisions made there about how to treat you and your claim, you're covered under that act, and it's a very powerful one. To bring a claim under the DC Human Rights Act, there are a couple of differences. You can, just like with Title VII, file an administrative charge. You can go to the DC Human Rights Office and file an administrative charge there, but it's not required. You can go straight to court for a DC Human Rights Act violation, which is an important and powerful difference in the two laws. It's a very broad, provides many more protections than the state law. And if you're in DC or if you've got a claim that's covered by the DC Human Rights Act, consider yourself lucky. Wish you the best of luck.